Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Thanks for tuning in to another episode in the series here. My name is Dominic, and I am the host of the Android Factory. In the last episode here, we went ahead and discussed a little bit about our view state implementation and talked a little bit about this, proper practice of exposure and live data versus mutable live data exposure from the view model to the view layer. So if you missed any of that, I'll link a card in the top right so that you can go ahead and get caught up to speed. If you have missed it, I would really suggest going back and checking it out just because it's going to make this hopefully make a lot more sense. So I'm going to assume that we have the knowledge of the last episode from this point forward, so thank you for tuning back in. Okay, so we've completed our data layer here. We've completed a function that's going to generate the proper view state for what we're trying to accomplish, and now we need to go ahead and implement that. Yeah, we don't need this. Okay, so my thought process here, right, we're in the add item entity fragment. Because we want to support whether they're going to this screen for the first time or whether they're going to this screen because they are editing a particular item, we want the same functionality for our recycler view that's going to be down here for our categories, right? So we have this idea in our on view created that if we have the selected item entity, we go ahead and set up our screen if we are in edit mode, right? I think after this little block of code ends up running is the appropriate time to invoke that function that we've gone ahead and created here, right? Because when we say shared view model dot on category selected, now I understand that that doesn't really make too much sense at this very moment because there's no category that has been selected, but it'll make sense in a second. We can very easily say selected item entity question mark dot category ID. Otherwise, maybe just an empty string, or we can define this somewhere. Okay, I've actually gone ahead and added basically a static variable on the category entity. The default category ID, we're just going to say none. And so the idea is that this ID is not going to exist as an actual ID in our database, so it's not going to be recognized in any of our logic as a particular category. So we can resume what we were doing here. Instead of an empty string, it was on category entity dot default category ID, right? So the idea is if they're arriving at the screen, the add item entity fragment, if they're arriving on the screen because they're adding an item to the database, the selected item entity is going to be null, right? Because they're not updating something. So then we're going to have the Elvis operator invoked, and we're going to pass in the word none in all caps. Otherwise, if they are coming to the screen and they are coming here because they're updating a particular item, the selected item entity is not going to be null, and therefore there is going to be a category ID. So we are going to invoke this same function here, and it will basically populate the view state whose ID should be selected. So at that point in time, then it's our job on the view layer to select that element in our UI and give the user the appearance that, yes, that is right. This item entity is attached to this correct category, so therefore it is selected. So then on top of it, we can go ahead and there it is, category view state live data. We're going to want to go ahead and observe this at our on our view layer, and then we need to actually go ahead and create an epoxy controller to handle all this information. One thing I'm thinking about here is, inside this function, the view state, when we're getting into the loading case, we want to populate that immediately, right? Because we don't want any carryover from the last view state that existed in this live data. We basically, at this moment in time when this category is selected, we want to immediately set it to be the loading state, and then we'll go ahead and do whatever consumes a little bit more time, and maybe we'll even add like a small delay inside of here so that we can actually see the loading state happening, and then the categories kind of presenting themselves as they should. So because we're going to go ahead and operate in a linear fashion here, we're going to have hopefully a loading state by the time we end up observing this information here. So let's go ahead and just say add category we're just going to go category view state epoxy controller here because that's kind of what we named some of the other parts of it. And we need a view state at this moment in time. So the view state here is going to equal category's view state. And then on set of that, we're going to say the field equals value and then request model build, right? So now at this point in time, we can actually handle the various UI cases, I guess, right? In our case, we only are dealing with loading and then when there's a valid information, but you know, in a regular application, you could very easily have a loading state, an error state, an empty state, a somewhere in the middle state for, you know, any of those different states, and then, you know, the final product of like the happy trail. This is all your information, right? So we can say if view state dot is loading, we have well, I think we actually, yeah, I have the loading epoxy model. I just don't have the don't have an extension for it to add it quickly, but simple enough to add a loading state here. And then otherwise, we're just going to say view state dot item list dot for each, and I'm just going to call this an item. And then here we're going to go ahead and build our UI here. So we have this model category item selection. That should probably be renamed, but we're going to stick with it anyway because it's just the name of the layout file for now. So data class category use state item. I don't know. I'm running out of ideas here. We know this part. It's going to be a view binding Kotlin model that's going to have the model category item selection. Wow, that's a really bad name. I'll fix that at some point. R.layout model. Import that model category item selection, and then we got to implement our bind function. And here we're going to accept an item, right? And that item is going to be the one from the categories view state. And so then this is where, you know, the little bit of logic for each of our items is going to exist. So first things first, we have our text view. We can set the text to be the item dot category entity dot name. Text view, set text color. Remember last episode when I went ahead and put this logic inside here? We added this function into our base layer, our base fragment, but the base fragment is not, you know, we don't have access to it in this epoxy model. So a perfect example of why we should, or how extensions are helpful again, we're going to go ahead and just put this on the view itself and call get attribute color on it. And so then we can very easily say root dot get attribute, that's not what I'm looking for, attribute color r, well, now we need a little bit of logic here. So we're going to say val color equals if, well, let's leave it at color resource. Okay, so if our item is selected, we're going to say r dot attribute secondary color secondary, else r dot attribute dot let's go with color primary, and then we're just going to very easily do that. Boom. So now we have a little bit of conditional theming, if you will, here. And then also going to say root, which is should be a material card view. So set stroke color is going to be a color state list dot value of the color resource, right? So we have our information stored in this variable. We use it to set our text color and the stroke color of the card view. So all that's left here is for each one of our items that exist in here, we're going to go ahead and add our item to, or add an epoxy controller to the, I apologize. We're going to add a epoxy model to our controller for every one of our items that exist in the view state, and we are using the category entities ID, which should be unique because it's acting as a primary key in the database, so actually it has to be unique. And then that's it, right? So our view layer, or I guess the display of it, is pretty straightforward. And then if we just create our let's go with categories view state epoxy controller, so very long. Then we're going to set our categories epoxy view controller, set controller to be that controller. And then inside of here, all we're going to do is say category view state epoxy controller view state equals view state. Now sometimes it is worth it to break out some of this conditional logic that we have here, right? Like the loading state, and then maybe we could check if there's an error state, if there's this, if there's that. You know, you can break that out inside of this observer, but for our sake right now, all we need to do is basically bubble up that view state to the controller. The controller will take care of the rest of it. So let's just give this a run, see what happens. I'm not sure if I'm missing anything, but off the top of my head, we should be good to go. Okay, so we have our app up and running here. Oh, look at that. We saw a little loading state, which was quite interesting. And okay, it's on the screen, right? We're on the screen here. Nothing too horrible. Do a little cleanup here just to get us to the point where I want us to be. Okay, so I've gone ahead and updated some stuff here, UI-wise and whatnot, just cleaning some things up, and we should be good to go here. I also implemented a little callback here so that in the epoxy model, we have a on-click listener for the root, so then we bubble up the event with this little function here that exists inside of our epoxy controller. Now that I think about it, nothing is happening. So this is where it'll eventually come up. So the category ID is right here, and all we need to do is say shared view model on category selected, category ID. And so now hopefully that function name makes a little bit more sense there. But essentially when we just create our epoxy controller, we have a simple callback here that we pass all the way down to the epoxy model to just capture that moment. So as this rebuilds and runs, let's go ahead and just add an item to our list here. Emulator running nice and slow. However, we did see that loading state, which is quite nice. And then we can see here we have all of our item entities, all of our category entities displayed here, kind of spaced out appropriately. None of them appear to be selected. And then if we wanted to, okay, so we see a little bit of a funky interaction there. But if we wanted to, you know, quickly just tap on one to select it, we can then see which element has been selected. Are these changing order? What? Why is it changing order? Hello? All right, so there's still a little bit to clean up here. However, it does work at the moment. And let's see if we go ahead and add this item that says Home Depot 3, please, at quantity 4, and then we save it. We go ahead and check out our database here, the item entity. Let me just refresh the table here. Where is it? Oh, wow, titles right here. Home Home Depot 3, please. Our category ID is still empty, and that's because we haven't gone ahead and actually done anything with when we go ahead and create the item itself. So I think in the next episode we'll go ahead and kind of clean some things up, put a little bit more polish on it, and then get this connected here so that we can actually go ahead and see the correct category being saved to the database, and then therefore the correct category entity being pulled out of the database when we are viewing this screen here, and then we'll figure out a way to display the category and maybe continue on from there. So we are making a little bit of progress here. I'm looking forward to kind of getting the last bits of this in place and a little bit of that polish and cleanup and stuff. So that that sounds all good and well. If you've made it this far and you appreciate the content or enjoying it, I'd appreciate a thumbs up on the video. And otherwise, I have to or hope to catch you in the next one. Thanks.